The near-death experience, NDE, is a phenomenon that occurs to people who have been on the brink of death or were clinically declared dead, but then return to life. During an NDE, these individuals report being transported to a different dimension, where they experience unusual sensations, visions, and encounters. Typically, these accounts include the feeling of floating outside the body, seeing oneself lying in bed or at the place where the body was, and perceiving the presence of luminous beings or figures. Often, these people describe traveling through a tunnel, encountering bright lights, serene landscapes, or even meeting deceased loved ones. Although science does not have a definitive explanation for NDEs, these accounts have intrigued the scientific community for decades. Many people who undergo an NDE return with abilities or knowledge they didn't possess before, such as playing instruments or speaking unknown languages. NDEs are often described as a projection of consciousness, where the soul or spirit separates from the physical body, experiencing life in a different reality. NDE accounts are similar among people from different cultures and beliefs, making the phenomenon even more fascinating and mysterious. Before we proceed with more revelations about the intriguing Montauk project, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel and click like if you're enjoying the content. Your interaction is crucial for us to continue unraveling mysteries that challenge our reality. Don't forget to comment below from which city you're watching, so we can see how far our terrifying stories are reaching. Now, let's dive even deeper into this fascinating story. NDE accounts, true stories. Account 1. I'm Kel, and I'm from Rio de Janeiro. At the age of 10, in November 1986, I had an experience that changed my life forever. I became very ill and was taken to the hospital. At the time, I underwent 3 surgeries and needed 3 blood transfusions. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. They couldn't make a diagnosis. My mother, who was very religious, asked to stay at the hospital praying while she went home to pray with the sisters from the church. I remember lying in the hospital bed, praying and asking God to heal me. That's when I felt my body starting to rise. I was floating, heading towards the ceiling of the room. Suddenly, my body flipped over the bed, and I saw myself lying there, observing everything from above. To my left, there was something curious, several high heels, all very white. At the foot of the bed, there were many people, all dressed in white. I didn't know any of them, except for a lady who lived on my street and used to pray for people. She was there, and I asked her where my mother was. She told me that my mother was at home, praying for me. After that, I headed towards the door of the room. When I opened it and passed through, I was no longer in the hospital. Suddenly, I found myself in a very beautiful place, surrounded by trees that closed in forming an arch above me. In front of me, there was a train track, covered with small stones. I walked along this track for a long time, heading towards a distant point. There I saw a large rock with a crack, and I knew I needed to cross it. As I approached the crack, I heard a strong masculine voice behind me saying, "Go back." I looked back and saw a man, dressed in robes with a cord tied around his waist. He repeated, "Go back." Suddenly, I found myself near him again, without retracing my steps. He extended his left hand to me, and when I touched it, I felt a strong pull that drew me back. I felt like I was floating again, as before, but now towards my body. Suddenly, I fell back into the hospital bed. When I opened my eyes, I saw doctors around me and my mother crying. I was receiving a blood transfusion, but the blood was spilled all over the room floor. I got very scared and fell asleep again. When I woke up again, I told my mother everything I had seen. She was surprised and told me that on that very day, when she arrived at the hospital, she saw something strange. It seemed like my spirit was floating above the bed. She then called the doctors, and everything happened as I had recounted. Since that day, I realized that something in me had changed. It's like I had one foot in the spiritual world. I started having strange dreams in which I saw things that ended up happening. I also began to see shadows and other things that I can't explain. This experience truly changed my life and the way I see the world. Account 2. My name is John, and what I'm about to share with you is something that completely changed my life. Before that day, I was just an ordinary guy, living my quiet life as an electrician in a small town in the United States. I have a wonderful family, a simple routine, and I never imagined something like this could happen to me. It all started on a day that seemed like any other. I was at home, getting ready for another day of work when suddenly I felt an intense pain in my chest. It was a pain so strong that I could barely breathe. I collapsed to the floor, and everything started to go dark. I knew something was very wrong, but I couldn't do anything. My wife called the ambulance, and the paramedics arrived quickly. I could hear the sound of the sirens and feel the panic in the air, but gradually, everything faded away. And that's when something happened that I will never forget. When I thought I was dying, I suddenly saw myself floating above my own body. I was there, watching the paramedics desperately working to save me. I could see every detail, the sweat running down their faces, the agony in my wife's eyes. It was like watching a movie, but I knew it was real. I was there, but at the same time, I wasn't. Then something even stranger happened. I felt as if an invisible force was pulling me, and I began to be rapidly taken through a dark tunnel. I didn't feel fear, but rather an intense curiosity mixed with a peace I had never experienced before. At the end of the tunnel, I saw a bright light, a light that seemed to embrace me, inviting me to move forward. When I reached the end of the tunnel, I found myself in a place that seemed like something out of a dream. It was a lush green field, with flowers so vibrant they almost seemed unreal. The air was pure, the sky was a deep blue, and everything seemed in perfect harmony. I felt a peace so profound that it's hard to describe in words. But the most surprising part was yet to come. As I explored that place, I began to realize that I wasn't alone. There were other people there, all seeming radiant, as if they were in complete happiness. And then suddenly, I saw someone I recognized. It was my grandmother, who had passed away many years before. She looked young, healthy, and her presence brought me a sense of comfort I had never felt before. We didn't need to speak, it was as if we communicated through thoughts. She conveyed a message of love to me, saying she was there to guide me. I wanted to stay there, wanted to explore that place, to understand what was happening. But then, everything changed suddenly. I heard a voice, a male voice that seemed to come from all directions, but also from within me. It was a firm, authoritative voice that said, "It's not your time, John. You need to go back." At that moment, I felt myself being pulled back with an irresistible force. The tunnel I had traveled through before now rushed past me at high speed. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses who looked relieved. I had come back to life. After everything that happened, I knew that something inside me had changed forever. I wasn't the same John as before. That experience made me see life in a completely different way. I quit my job as an electrician because I realized I needed to spend more time with my family, on the things that truly matter. I started seeking more answers, connecting with spirituality in a way I never had before. The things I once considered important now seemed insignificant. I realized there's something beyond this life, something bigger than us. I can't explain what it is, but I know it's real. Since that day, I live with a deep certainty that death is not the end but rather a passage to something greater, something we don't fully understand yet. And that certainty has changed my life in a way I never thought possible. Account 3. I never imagined something like this could happen to me until, in 2006, during the birth of my youngest child, I experienced something that forever changed how I see life and death. My name is Anna Katharina, a psychologist who, until that moment, had never heard of near-death experiences. It all started when, during the cesarean section, after receiving a spinal anesthesia, I began to feel unwell, very unwell. I tried to explain to the nurse beside me what was happening, but it was as if my words were trapped, as if I couldn't make myself understood. She looked at me with a panicked expression and suddenly started to cry. At that moment, something inexplicable happened. I felt as if my face was folding inward, as if I could see inside my own eyes. It was a strange, almost surreal sensation. I looked at the monitor beside my bed and saw the line that was monitoring my vital signs go flat, and then everything went silent. It was at that moment that I realized something very serious was happening. Suddenly, I was no longer in that hospital room. I left my body and saw myself standing next to the monitor, watching myself lying on the bed. The scene was as if I were watching a movie, but I knew it was real. There was a strange stillness, a silence that seemed to envelop everything, as if time had been suspended. Nothing moved. Everything was still, except for me. In the blink of an eye, I was transported to another place, completely different. I was lying in a bed, but the bed wasn't the same as the hospital one. The rail was white, and everything around me was immensely white, as if I were in a place made of light. The brightness was intense, but it didn't hurt my eyes. On the contrary, it was welcoming, enveloping. There was an indescribable peace, a tranquility I had never felt before. There was no pain, no fear, just a sense that everything was exactly as it should be. As I looked around, I saw that I wasn't alone. There were people, or rather, beings dressed in white, about 30 in total. They were gathered at a distance, but the light was so strong that I could only make out their silhouettes, like shadows within the light. They had their backs to me, as if they had something important to do, but I didn't know what. Even though I couldn't see their faces, I felt that they were there to help me, to guide me in some way. And yet, I knew it wasn't my time. I felt, with deep conviction, that I still had something to do in the world of the living. As this peace enveloped me, a thought began to arise in my mind: what am I doing here? I shouldn't be here, not now. This thought brought a slight discomfort, like a doubt that couldn't be ignored. I didn't see any entity, not even Jesus, as we often hear in stories, but the feeling that this wasn't my place grew stronger. Then everything changed. Suddenly, in the midst of that peace, I heard a sound that cut through the silence like lightning, the cry of my baby. It was a sharp, desperate sound that pulled me back with a force I couldn't resist. I felt as if I was being sucked through a tunnel, falling at an incredible speed, while the light around me began to fade. It was a terrifying sensation, as if I was leaving something behind that I could never recover. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my body, but the feeling of discomfort remained. I felt warmth rising from my feet to my head, as if my circulation was suddenly returning. I heard voices around me, the doctors discussing what had happened. One of the nurses was administering medication to stabilize my blood pressure, and I knew I had just returned from a place where many don't get the chance to come back. After the delivery, while I was alone in the recovery room, I looked at the clock, trying to orient myself in time, but it seemed like hours had passed, when in reality, it had only been minutes. When I was finally taken to my room, another mother, who had just given birth, told me that the doctors were talking about a mother who died and came back. At that moment, I knew the story I heard was mine. Since then, everything has changed. What I experienced in that place, the peace, the light, the feeling of being between two worlds, is something I carry with me every day. It wasn't easy to come back. The feeling of being pulled back, my baby's cry calling me, still haunts me. But at the same time, it gives me the certainty that I still have a mission here. I came back for my daughter, for my family, and nothing will ever be the same. Now I see life with new eyes, with a new perception of what truly matters. Account 4. In 1998, Lars Grael, one of Brazil's most renowned sailors and an Olympic medalist, experienced an event that forever transformed his perspective on life. What was supposed to be just another regatta in Espírito Santo turned into one of the most dramatic episodes of his life, with the idyllic sea setting the stage for an accident that nearly cost him his life. It all started abruptly. Lars was focused on the competition, maneuvering his boat with the skill of someone who had dedicated decades to the sport. Suddenly, an out-of-control speedboat appeared, barreling towards him at high speed and crashing into his boat with brutal force. The impact was devastating. Lars was thrown into the sea, and in the chaos of the moment, his right leg was severely mutilated. As the water around him turned red, he was quickly pulled out and rushed to the ambulance, but the nightmare was far from over. In the ambulance, Lars's condition deteriorated rapidly. He began to lose consciousness, and it was then that he experienced his first cardiac arrest. But instead of feeling the fear and pain one might expect at such a moment, Lars felt something entirely different. He described the sensation as immense peace, a tranquility that enveloped his entire being. Suddenly, he was no longer there, in the midst of chaos and pain. Instead, he found himself levitating above his own body, observing the scene below like a spectator. The doctors were working frantically, trying to revive him, but he felt no pain. There was no more suffering, only a sense of comfort, as if he were being embraced by an invisible force. This feeling of peace was so profound that Lars felt as if time had stopped. He was above it all, seeing his lifeless body, the doctor struggling, but he himself was in a state of serenity that he had never experienced before. Everything seemed distant, as if he were in a dream. But then, something began to change. Lars noticed that the intensity of the resuscitation efforts was waning. He saw the doctors starting to disengage, as if they were giving up. At that moment, something inside him awakened. He knew he was still there, alive, and he didn't want them to stop. He thought with silent urgency, "I'm still here, I'm alive, please keep going." He wanted to scream, wanted them to know he was still fighting, but no sound came out. It was as if he were trapped between two worlds, desperately trying to hold on to life. Then he experienced a second cardiac arrest. But unlike the first, this one was different. Lars felt as if he were being pulled back, as if an invisible force was pushing him to return to his body. And suddenly he was back, feeling the pain again, the weight of gravity, the warmth of the blood still coursing through his veins. When he was finally successfully revived, Lars opened his eyes and saw the exhausted faces of the doctors around him. They had managed to bring him back, but something inside him had changed forever. This experience, this brief visit to the threshold between life and death, left deep marks. Lars Grail never saw life the same way again. The near-death experience made him value every moment, every breath, every second he still had in this world. He described this experience as a rebirth, a moment when he understood the fragility of life and the importance of living with intensity and gratitude. From that day on, Lars Grail lived not only as a champion in sport but as a champion of life, someone who knows the value of each moment and chooses to live them fully. Account 5. Mom, do you remember that day? The day when everything seemed so normal, but it changed everything. I was playing on the rooftop, as I always did. You had called me down a few times, saying it was dangerous, but I was so excited, running from one side to the other, that I didn't listen. The sun was shining bright, the sky was blue, and the wind was gently blowing, but I didn't care. I just wanted to enjoy that wide open space to play. Everything happened so quickly, Mom. I was running near the edge, looking down at the ground below, imagining what it would be like if I could fly. That's when I tripped over one of the loose stones and lost my balance. I remember feeling my body falling, and it felt like time had stopped. The ground was coming closer and closer, but strangely, I didn't feel scared. It was as if I was floating, like the air around me was holding me up for a brief moment. And then, darkness came. Everything went black, and I couldn't see or hear anything. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't on the ground, nor on the rooftop, nor in any place I recognized. I was floating in the air, and I could see my own body lying on the ground, motionless. It was a very strange feeling, Mom. I knew that was my body, but at the same time, it didn't feel like me. I was up there, looking down, watching everything happen, but I didn't feel anything. I saw when you ran out of the house, desperate. Your face was pale, and you were shouting my name with an anguish I had never heard before. I saw you kneel beside me, trying to wake me up, but I didn't respond. It was like I was in a dream, watching everything from afar, unable to do anything. I saw the tears streaming down your face as you shook my body, trying to bring me back. I saw the despair in your eyes, and that hurt me, Mom, it hurt a lot. Soon, I saw the neighbors approaching, all trying to help in some way. Someone called an ambulance, and I saw when the paramedics arrived, quickly putting my body on a stretcher and taking it to the ambulance. That's when I started to feel afraid. A deep fear, like something terrible was about to happen. As I floated above everything, I noticed a strange presence around me. The sky, which had been clear before, began to darken, and I saw shadows forming around me. They were dark, distorted figures that seemed to be lurking, as if waiting for something. These shadows moved slowly, as if they were approaching me, and I began to feel a terror I had never felt before. I wanted to scream, I wanted you to hear me, but no sound came out. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Then, a light appeared. It was a light so bright that it seemed to cut through the darkness. From this light, a figure emerged, a figure that seemed to be made of pure energy, pure love. It was a person, but I couldn't see their face clearly. All I could perceive was the peace that radiated from that presence. a peace that began to push away the shadows surrounding me. The dark figures shrank back, as if they were afraid of that light, and they began to dissolve into the darkness. The luminous figure floated towards me and, without saying a word, extended a hand. I didn't know what to do, Mom. Part of me wanted to leave, to escape from that strange place, but another part felt that I should trust that light. When I finally touched the figure's hand, I felt a wave of warmth and comfort flow through my body. The darkness around me completely disappeared, and I felt safe, like nothing could harm me. The figure then spoke to me, but not with words. It was as if I could hear their thoughts directly in my head. They told me that everything would be okay, that I didn't need to be afraid. They told me that it wasn't my time yet, that there was much for me to live, much to learn. And then, as if guiding me, they began to lead me back to my body, back to where I belonged. As the figure guided me, I began to feel the pain in my body again, the weight of gravity, the sound of the ambulance sirens. I didn't want to return, Mom, because the pain was unbearable, but the figure of light told me it was necessary, that I needed to be strong, that you needed me. When I returned to my body, the pain was so intense that I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I heard the paramedics talking about a skull fracture, about how serious the situation was, and I felt a wave of despair wash over me. But at the same time, I still felt the presence of that figure of light, as if they were telling me to hang on, not to give up. When I arrived at the hospital, everything was a blur. I remember you by my side, holding my hand, crying, while the doctors rushed around. They took me to the emergency room, and then everything went dark again. I think I slept, or maybe I passed out, I'm not sure. All I know is that throughout all of this, the presence of that light never left me. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, with you by my side. The pain was still there, but something inside me had changed. I knew I had seen something that wasn't from this world, something that showed me there's more than we can see, that there's something beyond the life we know. I knew that for some reason I had been brought back, and that now I had a new chance to live. Mom, I don't know how to explain everything that happened, but I know that in that moment, someone or something was protecting me. Maybe it was an angel, or maybe it was just a manifestation of the love you've always had for me. What matters is that I'm here, and that now I see life in a different way. I know life is fragile, that everything can change in an instant, but I also know there's something more, something that protects us, that guides us, even in the darkest moments. And now, whenever I close my eyes, I can still feel that light, that presence that brought me back. I'm not afraid anymore, Mom, because I know I'll never be alone. And that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. With shades of orange and purple, but to be honest, I wasn't even paying attention. I was just thinking about getting there and seeing my mom. When the bus finally stopped at my stop, I hurried off, as usual. I was so distracted that I didn't even look both ways before crossing the street. It was a mistake, a serious mistake. I had barely taken 2 steps when I was hit by a car speeding by. I only remember the impact, the sensation of being thrown into the air, and then the ground rushing up too quickly. In that moment, I thought I was going to die. But then something strange happened. Suddenly, I didn't feel any pain. The world around me went silent, as if someone had pressed a pause button. When I opened my eyes, I saw myself floating above everything. I could see my body lying in the street, the car stopped with a crumpled front, the driver in shock, and people starting to gather around. It was a completely surreal feeling. I knew it was real, but at the same time, it felt like a dream, one of those dreams you want to wake up from but can't. Time seemed distorted, everything was slow, like the world was in slow motion. People moved slowly, voices were muffled, and I felt a strange peace, a lightness I had never experienced before. As I watched everything, I felt a presence beside me. When I turned, I saw a figure dressed all in white, with a serene and gentle face. They looked at me with a soft smile and said, without moving their mouth, as if the voice came directly into my mind, "This will all pass, Clara. You are safe. There is nothing to worry about." Those words were comforting, but at the same time, something inside me was still alert, as if it knew it wasn't that simple. That's when I noticed something on the other side of the street. There was a darkness, something the sunset couldn't illuminate. It was a strange shadow that seemed alive, moving, twisting, like it was watching everything happening. I tried to focus, but the more I tried, the more fear grew inside me. I knew that darkness was there for a reason, but I couldn't understand what it was. While I was trying to figure out what that shadow was, the figure in white kept talking to me, trying to calm me down, but I could barely hear them. My attention was completely caught by the darkness that seemed to be getting closer slowly, as if it was surrounding me. Then the figure in white placed a hand on my shoulder, and for a moment, I felt an even deeper peace. But the shadow kept moving, and soon I started to see shapes in it. They were figures, people, or something that looked like people, but without faces, without features. They were walking shadows, reaching out to me, as if they wanted to grab me, pull me into that darkness. The figure in white squeezed my shoulder and said, "It's not your time." But there was an urgency in their voice now, like they were fighting against time, or against those shadows. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, but I was floating, stuck between two worlds. The shadowy figures were getting closer, and the fear inside me turned into panic. And then suddenly, I heard something that broke the silence, a familiar but desperate voice. "She's coming back," someone shouted. It was one of the paramedics, but I couldn't see who. At that moment, I felt a force pulling me with all its might, like I was being sucked back into my body. The figure in white was left behind, but before they disappeared, they looked at me one last time, with an expression I couldn't decipher. It was a mix of sadness and acceptance. As I was being pulled back, the shadows tried to reach me, but they were repelled by a light that surrounded me. Everything went white for a second, and then, the pain returned. I felt my body again, the weight, the gravity, the pain of the impact. I opened my eyes suddenly, with paramedics around me. They were relieved, but I was confused. I was put on the stretcher and taken to the ambulance. As I lay there, looking at the darkening sky, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The figure in white, the shadows, it all felt like a nightmare, but I knew it was real. What disturbed me the most was the feeling that, even though I had come back, that shadow was still there somewhere waiting. I never told anyone about what I saw, about what I felt, but since then, every time I cross the street, I feel like I'm being watched, like something is still lurking, waiting for the right moment to try again. I don't know what that shadow was, or why the figure in white was there to help me. Maybe I'll never know. But what happened that day changed everything. Now, I see life in a different way, as if I know there's something beyond, something we can't fully understand. And that idea, that feeling, is something I carry with me every day, like a dark and mysterious secret that no one else knows. Account 6. My name is Robert Malafea, and that night, everything seemed so ordinary, so routine, that I could never have imagined what was about to happen. I was having dinner with my family at home, just like we did almost every night. My kids were laughing and playing in the living room. My wife was telling me about her day, and the aroma of homemade food filled the air. But for some reason, something felt off. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and I felt a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. But, as always, I ignored the feeling and continued eating, trying to enjoy that moment with my family. After dinner, my wife asked me to go to the store to buy some milk before it closed. It was nothing major, just a quick trip, something I had done countless times before. I grabbed my car keys, kissed the kids, and headed out. The streets were quiet, which was normal for that time of night. I drove slowly, lost in thought, maybe still bothered by that strange feeling I had during dinner. I was almost at the store when suddenly, two motorcyclists appeared out of nowhere. They banged on my car window with violence, making me jump in fear. It was a robbery. Panic immediately took over me. All they wanted was the money, the car, anything of value I had, and I knew I shouldn't resist. But fear paralyzed me. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I tried to open the glove compartment to get my wallet. My body seemed to refuse to obey. The more I tried, the harder it seemed. Then I felt it. An intense heat in my head, followed by a dull, overwhelming pain. One of the robbers had lost patience. They fired. The sound of the shot echoed in my mind, but oddly, the pain didn't last. Instead, I began to feel my body go numb, as if I was slowly disconnecting from the world around me. My field of vision started to narrow, and the sounds around me distorted until everything began to fade away. And that's when everything changed. Suddenly, the weight of my body disappeared. I felt like I was floating, and when I looked around, I realized I was no longer inside the car. I was above it, watching the scene from above, as if I were a spectator. I saw my body slumped in the driver's seat, blood running down my head. The robbers were in a panic, looking around as if they were afraid of being seen, but all of that seemed so distant to me, as if it no longer mattered. As I floated, an intense light began to surround me. It wasn't just any light, it was something warm, comforting, that seemed to envelop me completely. From within this light, I began to see shapes, figures that seemed to be made of pure energy. They were hard to distinguish, but I felt a powerful presence, something that filled me with peace, something that told me everything was okay, that I was safe. I was pulled into this light, and everything around me began to fade. The world, the car, the robbers, everything started to disappear, as if it had never existed. Inside the light, time no longer existed. It was as if I were in a place outside of time, where nothing happening in the real world mattered. I saw images of happy moments, moments I had lived with my family, as if I were reliving the best parts of my life. But then, a soft and comforting voice spoke to me. It wasn't a voice I could recognize, but it brought me a sense of tranquility that I had never felt before. "It's not your time yet, Robert," the voice said. "You have much to do. Go back to those who love you." At that moment, I knew I had to go back. I didn't want to, because the place where I was filled me with such deep peace that it's almost impossible to describe. But something pulled me back, tore me away from that place of light, and I began to feel the weight of my body again, the pain, the warmth of the blood running. Suddenly, I was back in the car, with the distorted sounds of reality beginning to make themselves heard again. I heard sirens in the distance. The paramedics arrived quickly. I was conscious, but not fully. I saw their faces, their hands working quickly to try to stabilize me, but everything was a blur. They were talking to me, but I couldn't respond. I was caught between two worlds, fighting to stay in the one where my family was, but still feeling the call of that other side. As the paramedics put me in the ambulance, something surprising happened. The motorcyclists, who were still nearby, fleeing in panic, ended up being intercepted by a patrol car that was close by, responding to a call about another crime. It was an incredible coincidence, but it felt like it was planned by something greater. They were caught before they could escape, as if fate had intervened to ensure they paid for what they had done. I was taken to the hospital, and the next few hours were critical. My wife was called urgently, and I learned later that she stayed by my side the whole time, holding my hand, praying for me to survive. I was in a state between life and death, and the fight was intense. But I felt that light, that presence, still with me, guiding me back to life, giving me strength to resist. When I finally woke up, I was surrounded by my family. My wife's face was pale, but her eyes were shining with relief. My kids, still small, didn't fully understand what had happened, but they knew something very serious had occurred. I looked at them and knew that something inside me had changed forever. I had been to the other side, had felt the peace of that place, but had also felt the terror of almost losing everything. Today, every moment with my family has a new meaning. Life, which once seemed like a sequence of ordinary days, is now a precious gift, something I never want to take for granted again. My wife and I often talk about what happened, about what I saw, and how it changed our view of the world. She believes it was a miracle that I survived, and maybe it was. Maybe that light, that presence, was an angel or something like that, bringing me back. As for the robbers, I heard they were arrested and convicted. I don't feel hatred for them because I know that life has a way of settling scores. What I feel is gratitude for having been given a second chance, for having come back to the people I love. My family sees this experience as a constant reminder that life is fragile, but also full of possibilities. They look at me with a mix of relief and respect, as if they know I've been to a place where few return from. And I, for my part, am eternally grateful for this second chance. Now, every night before I go to sleep, I close my eyes and thank God for being here. And somewhere inside me, I still feel that light, that presence, reminding me that no matter what happens, we are never truly alone. The recovery was long, both physically and emotionally. I spent weeks in the hospital, undergoing multiple surgeries to remove bullet fragments and repair the damage they had caused. The hardest part, however, was dealing with the trauma of what had happened, both for me and my family. Every time I closed my eyes, I relived that moment when the motorcyclists hit the window, the fear that gripped me, and the feeling of being on the brink of death. My wife, despite the relief that I had survived, was also dealing with her own trauma. During those hours when I was between life and death, she had to confront the possibility of losing her husband and raising our children alone. I could see the fear in her eyes, even after everything had passed, even after the doctors said I would be okay. But something in both of us had changed. The experience brought a new kind of strength to our relationship. We started to value every moment together in a way we never had before. The small things, like family breakfasts, playing with the kids, even arguments over trivial matters, took on a different meaning. It was as if each day was a new chance, a gift that we needed to make the most of. My children, though young, sensed that something serious had happened. They didn't fully understand, but they knew that Daddy had gone through something terrible. I remember one night, while I was recovering at home, my oldest daughter came up to me while I was sitting in the living room, looking out the window. She climbed into my lap, hugged me, and said, "Daddy, I was scared of losing you." That broke me inside, but it also gave me a new determination to be present in their lives in a way I hadn't been before. The process of getting back to normal, if it can even be called that, was difficult. There were nightmares, flashbacks that came without warning, moments of panic that appeared out of nowhere. But along with that, there was something new inside me, a kind of certainty, a peace that came from that experience with the light, from that presence I felt during what I believe was a near-death experience. Gradually, I started sharing with my wife what I had seen and felt. It was hard to put into words because how do you explain something so beyond what we know, so far from our everyday reality? But I told her about the light, about the presence that guided me back, about the shadows that tried to pull me away, and about how I knew in that moment that it wasn't my time to go. She listened carefully without interrupting, and then she hugged me, saying she believed every word. She said maybe it was an angel, or perhaps a manifestation of God, but what mattered was that I had been brought back, that there was still a purpose for me here with her and the kids. Over time, I began to accept what happened as part of who I am now. I don't know why I was spared, why I didn't die in that car, but I know there's something more, something I still need to do, live or learn. And that gives me a new perspective on life, a desire to make the most of every moment. My family has changed too. Now we are closer, more present for each other. The experience made us realize how fragile we are, and at the same time, how strong we can be when we're together. Every day is a new opportunity to love, to care for each other, and to build a life worth living. As for the motorcyclists who attacked me, I heard they were convicted and are serving their sentences. I no longer feel hatred or resentment. I only feel gratitude for being alive, for having been given a second chance, and for having felt what I did that night. And every night when I lie down, I still close my eyes and feel the presence of that light. It's always there, reminding me that, no matter what happens, there's something greater, something that protects us, that guides us. And with that certainty, I live now, knowing that somehow, everything has a purpose, everything has meaning. This experience changed everything, transformed me, and made me a different person. Someone who knows the value of life, who understands the fragility of our existence, but also knows that, in the end, we are never truly alone. And that, to me, is the greatest gift anyone could receive. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like to support us. And more importantly, if you have a supernatural experience, don't keep it to yourself. Share your story in the comments below. Share your encounter with the inexplicable, feed the collective curiosity, and who knows, maybe together we can unravel these mysteries that linger like fog between the world of the living and the dead. Remember, the unknown is always lurking, just one story away. And now, as night falls, who knows what shadows might emerge from the darkness to whisper another true tale of terror.